Okay, I think everyone is getting in. Okay, Giovanni.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Giovanni. Okay, we are 10, 1 past 10, but just more 40 seconds we going to start. Okay. Okay, the room. Hari, I think is. Rafael Freire, I think Hari is still not connected or not.
I think he is connecting right now.
Okay, good. It's going to be working fine. Okay, as work for everyone. Okay, good morning for everyone. Okay, it's a pleasure for me here to be here today. Today we have the pleasure to have with us the Cine Talks, Tuanan Costa Lourenço. He is a postdoc in the Computational Material Design program. And today he's going to talk for us about how computational materials science can advance the development of new battery devices. Tuanan, we are pretty happy to have you here. Just take the stage, it takes your time. Okay, the idea is that we have 45 minutes plus 15 minutes for discussion. Okay, I will close my camera. Once you count up to 3, you can start.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Juarez. Thank you, everybody, for the presence here. So in this talk, as Professor Juarez said, the title of the talk is How Computational Material Science Can Advance the Development of New Batteries Devices. My idea here is talk more about how we can use the simulations and calculations to improve our understanding in the development of new materials for batteries and supercaps, and how we can combine simulations and experiment measurements. So before we start, I will just introduce myself. So here we have a timeline of my career. So I hold a bachelor degree in chemistry with technological attributions from Federal University of Alfenas, is a city in the south of Minas Gerais. I was born in Ribeirão Preto and grown up in Serrana. It's a small city besides Ribeirão, like 10 kilometers of distance. And this is a countryside of São Paulo state. And since this is countryside of São Paulo state, the city lives from sugarcane and alcohol production. So basically my goal as teenager in the beginning of my bachelor course was to get my degree in chemistry, go back to my city and work in a sugarcane or alcohol factory. So to be honest, I didn't care too much about research and science in the bachelor course. But one day we had a lecture from professors from physics, and he was talking about simulations and molecular modeling. And in his lecture, he said that he did calculations that were very heavy for the computers, and he needed like weeks and months to finish those calculations. And this information was stuck in my mind because I could not believe that there is any calculation that the computer needed like months to solve. And I was thinking this for a long time. And after some time, another professor from chemistry stated that he was going to start his lab and he needed students to do simulations. And I thought that it was my chance to try to understand about these heavy calculations. So I went to his office, talked to him, and said that I would like to work with him, but I didn't care about science. I just want to understand the stuff. So I didn't want a fellowship, a big project. I just want to understand and live. However, things become more interesting, and 16 years after, I'm still doing simulations. I'm still trying to understand the calculations, but now I care a lot about science, about the simulations. So this introduction is just to give one message for the young people. Sometimes we see some talks, some seminars that we think that does not fit for us or is not interesting, but sometimes worth the shot because this can change our way to see stuff and change the thing that we path our way. So still in Unifal, I got my master's degree in chemistry, working with CO2 capture using ion liquids and simulations, molecular dynamic simulations. 2015, I started my doctorate in chemistry in Fluminense Federal University in Niterói. During my PhD, I worked with the development of ionic liquids-based electrolytes for lithium-ion batteries. During my PhD, I had a sandwich doctorate in the United States, University of Notre Dame. And when I go back to Brazil in 2018, I had the opportunity to do a small research internship in Sweden, in Uppsala University. Was a very short time, like 3 months, but was very interesting because I was working in a hybrid lab. So they do experiment and theory. So very interesting to see how everything works together. Since 2019, I finished my PhD and started my postdoctorate research here, Institute of Chemistry of São Carlos, working under supervision of Professor Juarez Lopes Ferreira da Silva in the Ketenano group and also in the Computational Materials Design Division of CINE. Since 2020, I'm a fellow from FAPESP. In 2022, I moved to Germany to do my research internship abroad in University of Bonn. When I go back in 2024, I also start to work as a project leader in the P3 project. That is the project that we perform atomistic simulations for materials for batteries and supercaps. In my postdoc research, my main topic is the development of materials for sodium-ion electrolytes. So a brief introduction about computational materials design. I will not show too much stuff because Eva just did this some weeks ago. So in computational materials design, the CMD, we have 4 main divisions, but we have 6 projects. So the first project that we have is the materials for photovoltaics. So we studied perovskites for solar cells. We also have the materials for green hydrogen production. In the battery field, we have 2 projects, the P3, the project in which I am the project leader, materials for supercapacitors and ion batteries, and we have the P4, mesoscopic and microscopic behavior of materials in energy storage devices. The difference of the 2 projects is that in P3, we use atomistic simulations, and in P4, we use multiphysics methods. We also have the machine learning and artificial intelligence division, in which we have 2 projects also, the material design based on artificial intelligence and knowledge discovery and data-driven diagnosis in devices. Our PI is Professor Juarez, and our co-PI is Professor Marcos Quiles. The CMD is spread out in 4 different universities. We have, as I said, 6 projects, 5 professors, quite a few members, so postdoc researchers, PhD, masters, and undergrad students, and 1 focal point that help us in organizing our work. So before we start to talk about the data itself or the methods itself, let's just try to think in a simple way how a battery works. So we have here a schematic figure for a battery. So we can say that we have 3 main parts: the anode, the negative electrode, the cathode, the positive electrode, and in the middle, we have the electrolyte, that is the media that helps the ion. So let's think about sodium-ion battery. Let's have helps the ion to move from one side to the other side. When the battery discharges, we have the sodium ions leaving the anode, going to the cathode. When we charge the battery, we have the sodium ion leaving the cathode and going to the anode. So this is a very simple way to see how a battery works. But if we think about physical chemistry, we can say that we have different phenomena happening in the same time. So we have the mass transport here for the sodium ion moving across one side to the other side. We have a redox process when the sodium ion reaches the anode or the cathode, and we have chemical reactions happening here in the interface between the electrode and the electrolyte. If you have different phenomena, different physical chemical problems, that means that we need to use different techniques, different models to understand the full battery behavior. To do that, in the P3, what we do, we use density functional theory calculations, so DFT. In DFT, we are using quantum theory, so we have a good description and an explicit description of the electronic structure that, of course, increases the cost of the calculations, so we are limited to some 100 of atoms. But since we have a good and an implicit description of the electronic structure, we can simulate reactions, we can simulate charge transfer between particles, we can understand the electrochemical stability of the molecules, we can characterize structure and also energy barriers for reactions. However, In DFT, unless you are doing like MED DFT, in DFT, there is no time as a variable. So we cannot calculate transport per part. We cannot look to mass transport. To do that, we use classical molecular dynamics. In classical molecular dynamics, we are within the classical mechanics. So we are solving Newton's first law, Newton's equation, to understand the behavior of the atoms regarding timing. Here, the atoms are treated as rigid spheres with positive or negative charges and van der Waals radius. So that means that the electronic structure here is not explicit. We can say that is implicit within the charge, but we cannot simulate charge transfer. We cannot simulate reactions. There are some ways to simulate reactions within the MED simulations, the classical MED simulations, but we are doing some approaches to do the reaction. We are not simulating like electron transferring, break and bound reactions because of this. However, because we have this more simplified vision of the atomistic behavior, we can simulate thousands of atoms. So that means that we can have like simulation boxes like this one. And also, since we have time as variable, we can calculate transport properties like diffusion, ionic conductivity, and viscosity. So if we combine DFT and MED simulations, we can understand the major part of the behaviors and characterize almost everything within the materials that we need for the batteries. As I said, in P3, we work with atomistic simulations of batteries. Our main focus is sodium-ion batteries. Why we choose sodium-ion batteries? I like to use this phrase here, that is bringing low cost and sustainability, because with sodium-ion batteries, we can decrease the cost because we are looking to sodium that is way more abundant than lithium. Also, within the sodium-ion battery, we can use like cheaper materials than in the lithium-ion batteries that decrease even more the cost of the battery. And with the sodium-ion batteries, we can ensure, or at least try to ensure, that we are going to fulfill the demand of the battery in the future. However, keep in mind that when we say that we are working with sodium-ion batteries, we are focusing in some specific applications. So the idea is not to replace totally the lithium-ion batteries, but create some new opportunities in different applications. Also, a good point about sodium-ion batteries is that we can use part of the acknowledgement from the ion lithium batteries and also from the industrial facilities to produce those batteries. However, these batteries is still facing some challenge. So we see low energy density, lower lifespan, lower efficiency when we compare to the lithium-ion battery. And also we have some incompatibilities, like in the graphite, between the sodium ion and the materials that we use in the batteries today. So that means that we need to develop new materials to try to make these batteries more efficient and make them more competitive to the market. In the first phase of the scene, so in the last 5 years almost, we focused a lot in the improvement of electrolytes within the P3 project. The improvement of the electrolytes is not a simple task, because if we think what we saw in the battery charge, the electrolyte helps the migration of the cation from one side to the other side. So we need to look to ionic conductivity, viscosity, diffusivity. Also, the electrolyte helps and prevents some reactions between the electrolyte and the electrode. So we also need to look to energy barriers for reactions, possible reactions, electrochemical stability. And also the electrolyte is important to try to keep the safety of the battery. So we need to look into toxicity, flammability, and also vapor pressure. So find a good electrolyte is not a simple question. It's not a simple task. This is why we need to consider different materials, different techniques, and try to create some puzzle to understand what is going on. In general, we have focusing in 4 main classes of electrolytes along these years. So we have worked with we are working with organic electrolytes, dipiothetic solvents, ionic liquids, and we have worked with water and salt electrolytes for supercaps. If you look here, we can see that any of these materials, any of these classes of electrolytes has its own pros and cons. So we need to understand how to control these pros and cons. So our main goal here is try to understand how we can relate the chemical structure of the molecules with the physical chemistry properties that we see. So if we understand how we can do this relation, we can understand how to control or how to design new molecules to create specific properties, specific performance for the battery. Also, if we understand how each class works, we can also understand how combining this class to try to improve specific points in the electrolyte. So this is what we have done in the last years. So as I said, in the P3, we do atomistic simulations to understand materials for batteries and supercaps applications. So that means that every time that we look to a material, every time that we look to a property, we are trying to think and we are seeing the atomistic behavior, so the atomistic point of view of the property. So I will try to create some kind of correlations here to help us to understand the data that we are going to see in the next slides. So let's think about ionic contivity. The first way in understanding ionic contivity is using simple physics. Like ionic contivity is the ability of electrolyte to carry charge in the system. So carry charge, that means that we need to see the movement of the ion and the movement of the charge. So if you look here, we have like in blue, the cation, and in the red, we have the anion. So in the ionic contivity, we can see this behavior, like the cation moving solidly, freely inside the electrolyte, and this is really good for the ionic contivity because we see the movement of the charge. Also, we can see the ion pairing, so cation and anion moving together, but here we have positive and negative charge, so we have zero charge. So the total charge here is zero, so this is not good for ionic contivity. Also, we have this kind of structure in which we have some aggregation, and so we can see the motif moving together, and also here, zero charge because we have 3 positive, 3 negative. However, sometimes we can see like an extra anion here, so we have unbalanced charge, and this is good for ionic contivity. Also, we need to correlate ionic contivity with the structure. If we think about a salt in water, something like that, we are going to see this kind of solvation shell in which we have the anion and the cations around the anion. But keep in mind that solvation shell inside the electrolyte is a living structure. So this interaction here is always breaking and reforming. That means that one cation can go inside of the solvation shell, another go outside. So this is always changing and exchanging ions with different solvation shells. So if we understand how to control this interaction, how to control the solvation shell, we can improve ionic contivity. So we can use like weak coordinated anions to decrease this binding energy here and increase the exchange between the ions within the solvation shell. We can also use neutral additives, such as like water or organic solvents, in which we are breaking this interaction here because we have the solvation of the neutral molecule and the anion, so improve ionic contivity. Or we can also use the aggregation. So we are going to have a lot of ions together. This large number of interactions between cation and anions decrease the binding energy between them, and we can see some jumpings in which the cation can move across different solvation shells. So this is one way that we have to think, to think about ionic contivity and how to control it. So from this point, I'm going to show 2 works. Although I was talking and saying that our major goal in P3 is sodium-ion batteries, we also have collaborations with the Advanced Energy Storage division in CINI, in which we published some works regarding lithium-oxygen batteries. So I choose to show these works now because I think in this way it will be easier to show how we can use the simulations to understand experimental data or combine with experimental data to go beyond to understanding the materials. So this is the first collaboration that we had with the group of Professor Gustavo Dolbeck. And here, the goal of this project was to understand what happened with the DMSO lithium perchlorate electrolyte in a lithium oxygen battery when we add this ionic liquid crystal here. The cation of the ionic liquid is this imidazolium with 16 carbons in the chain and the bromide anion. So one ionic liquid crystal is an ionic liquid that can create some kind of nanodomains in the structure. So if we look here to the cation, we have positive charge in the ring, and we have like a polar chain here. So that means that in the liquid, this apolar chain is going to interact with other apolar chains. And also here, the rings are going to interact with the anions because the Coulombic interactions, but also with the other rings that will be closer because of the interactions between the apolar chains and the other apolar chains. So we can create this kind of nanodomains within the liquid. And of course, if we are changing the solvation shell of the ions, we are changing the properties. So how understand this? First data that we have is this cyclic voltammetry, experimental data. So the group of Professor Gustave Dolbeck, they observed that when they added the ionic liquid to this organic solvent electrolyte, they see an increase in the electrochemical stability of the electrolyte. So that means that when we have more and more electrolyte, ionic liquids in the electrolyte, we have a more stable electrolyte that is good. So good point, good information that we have here. So this shows that there is a reason and there is a motivation to use the ionic liquids as additives in organic electrolytes. Now the question is, okay, how this is going to impact the transport properties, the ionic conductivity of the electrolytes. So if we look here, we have here in this first plot experimental data for viscosity. So blue is viscosity, and the data is here in the right side. And in black, we have the ionic conductivity, and here in the left, we have the data. So this upper part here is the experimental data. And in the x-axis, we have concentration. So we are increasing the concentration of the ionic liquid inside the organic electrolyte. When we look into the viscosity, we see basically a constant increase in the viscosity when we have more and more ionic liquid. And this was expected because if we think ionic liquids are very viscous materials, so we are adding a viscous material inside a mixture, so it's expected that the viscosity is going to increase. However, if we think about like Fick law or any kind of movement transport law, we expect that if we increase the viscosity of a liquid, the mobility of the ions, the mobility of the molecules are going to decrease. But if we look here to the experimental data, what we see is there is increase in the viscosity. However, in the ionic conductivity, there is increase. Then we reach a maximum value and there is a decrease. So this behavior here in the first half was not expected. So how we can understand it? To understand this behavior, to go deeper in the characterization of this behavior, we run classical MD simulations. So we have here in the bottom the simulation data. So as you can see, we have increasing the concentration of the ionic liquids, we see an increase in the ionic conductivity, and then we see a decrease. However, when we compare the two data here, we can see that the quantitative behavior is different, the values are different, and also the point of the trade-off is different. And this is also expected because it does not matter what kind of simulation, what kind of model that we are using, we are always using models, and models have their own failures and limitations. So this not quantitative agreement was expected. However, if we look here, we have the same qualitative agreement. We see the increase and the decrease. And what we are always looking for is for the qualitative behavior. If I can describe the qualitative behavior of the experimental data, this means that I can describe the physical chemistry of the material. So my data is agreeing with the experimental behavior. So looking here, now we can think, okay, how we can understand it. So here in the left side, we have two equations. The first one is how we calculate ionic conductivity in MD simulations and how we calculate diffusion coefficients. If we look here to this part inside, what we are doing basically is measuring the displacement of one ion, measuring the displacement of another ion, and multiplying them. So I'm measuring the displacement of this guy, and multiplying them. Then I multiply this by the charge. So that means that to increase the ionic conductivity, two things can happen. First, my ions can be faster, so more displacement, or I can have more charge in the system. So if I adding more salt in the system, I'm adding more charge, I have more particles to carry charge. So this means that when we add more ions here, more ion liquid here, we see the increase because we have more charge carries in the system. However, This decrease here, it's because when we look to the displacement of the ions, when we look the diffusion coefficients of these ions, we see that they are always decreasing. So that means that we are increasing the concentration of ionic liquid, more charge carriers, but they are getting slower and slower. And after this point here, they are too slow that even if we add more ions here, there's no increase in the ionic conductivity. So we understood what's happening here. So now let's try to correlate this with what is happening inside the structure of the electrolyte. So here we have a bunch of radial distribution functions that we call RDFs or GFRs. This is a kind of analysis that we like a lot in MED simulations because we can create some kind of puzzles, connect them, and have a picture of the structure of the electrolyte. So one simple way to understand how RDF behaves is if we look to this chart here and to this interaction here. So here we have the interaction between DMSO and DMSO, right? So here in the chart, in the right, so we have a central molecule that we call this reference molecule. And when we calculate the RDF, what we are doing to the probability of distribution of the molecules around the reference molecule. So I'm always looking to the probability of distribution of molecules when I go to increase values of R. So this is my central DMSO here. So if we look here to the plot, in 0, I have 1 DMSO. When I go walking, nothing happens. So when I reach 0.3, we see increasing the peak. And this peak here represents this first solvation shell around DMSO. So that means that this peak here is this structure here. So that means that this first minima here is this dashed line here when we see the ending of the first solvation shell. And if we still walking, we can see a second peak here that will be the second solvation shell, the second minima, and so on. So looking to the RDF, we can say how are the interactions within the species in the electrolyte, how strong are those interactions, and also we can say how much ions or molecules I have around each ion and each molecule. So if you go here to the left side, we can see the interaction of lithium and DMSO. So when we have here in black, the lowest concentration of ion liquid, we can see this high peak here and low peak in the second solvation shell. So that means that major part of the interactions between lithium and DMSO are in the first solvation shell. So we have close contact here. However, when we increase the concentration of ion liquid, we see a decrease of this first peak. So if you look here to pink, there is no peak here, and we have increase in the second peak. So that means that those DMSOs that were around the lithium now are not around the lithium anymore. They are in the second solvation shell because something is inside the first solvation shell. And if you look to the interaction between lithium and bromide anion, we see this very high peak here that says that we have a very strong interaction between lithium and the bromide anion that was expecting because positive, negative charges. And when we increase the concentration, we see a decrease here in the first peak, but they still way higher than the DMSO. So that means that when we have more ion liquid in the system, lithium is mainly solvated by the anions, and the DMSO is occupying the second solvation shell. As we saw in the beginning of this slides, when we have strong interactions between the ions, probably we have low contribution to the ionic conductivity, and then this is why we see this decrease in the values here. Also, is interesting when we look to the RDF between the ring of the ion liquid cation with the ring of the ion liquid cation, and also between the carbon chains. Here we can see that when we have a small amount of ion liquid, there is no peak in black here, so no interaction between the cations. But when we increase the concentration, we see the appearing of the peak. That means that the cations are interacting with the cations, and we are seeing the formation of nanodomains in the structure that also contributing negatively to the ionic conductivity. Also, if you look here to the structure factor, we see that when we increase the concentration of ion liquid, there is increase here in this first peak here that indicates the formation of this ionic aggregation and nanodomains inside the electrolyte. So doing MED simulations and experimental data, we were able to understand what's happening in the atomistic point of view in the structure and how this reflects to the transport and the performance of the electrolyte. So As conclusion of this work here, we have seen that the ionic liquid affects the overall ionic mobility. Also, we see formation of nanodomains. We saw an increase in the electrochemical stability of the electrolyte. And in another study that we had, we saw that when we have cations in ion liquids with large chains, these cations tend to be more stable against reduction. So that means that if we use these cations in electrolytes, we can widen the electrochemical stability. Also, now a spoiler of our second work that we are going to publish in some point. We are still working with the system, but now we are doing simulations for confined systems. So we have a battery simulation like this one here. And here we can see that when we have the discharged battery, we see a lot of cations of ion liquids here in the cathode side. And we can see here the nanodomains. However, when we have the charged battery, we can see that the nanodomains is still existing in the liquid structure. However, the cations are here in the surface of the anode. And this can indicate for us that we have some formation of a stable solid electrolyte interface. And when we look at the experimental data, this is what they saw in the XPS and also in the MEV analysis. So even when we do simulations for confined systems for batteries, we can see agreements and contribute to the understanding of the experimental data. So the second work that I want to show for you is the investigation of the mechanism in the charge and discharge behavior of the electrolyte containing DMSO and lithium perchlorate, also in a lithium oxygen battery. This is also a collaboration with Professor Gustavo Dolbeck. And here, what we saw was, so they measured using Operando Raman the behavior of the electrolyte when they charge and discharge the battery. So if we look here to this figure in the right, you can see that when they discharge the battery, there is a decrease in this peak. So this is the Raman spectroscopy. And when they charge the battery, there is increase in the peak. And this also happens for other peaks here, other bands here. So that means that from this data, we can understand that we have some kind of reversibility in the electrolyte, in which when we discharge and charge the battery, we still keeping the integrity of the electrolyte. However, understanding Raman is not a simple question, a simple task. So in general, we need to rely a lot in literature to understanding and attribute the modes to each band here, each peak here. Also, if we want to understand this, we need to do like measurements for different systems to try to understand how the interactions are happening. So it's not a simple task when we do this by experimental data. The same with the infrared. So to try to understand in the investigation of this behavior, we calculated theoretical Raman using DFT and MED simulations. One problem when we do spectroscopy using DFT or any kind of Fourier simulations, it's because when we measure spectroscopy like Raman in the experimental data, when we are doing the experimental measurement, we are looking to the average of different solvation shells. So we have a really good sampling of the solvation shells within the system. However, when we do this in theory, we are looking to a smaller number of solvation shells. So sometimes it's hard to describe the behavior because we do not have a good sampling of our atomic coordinates. So to try to avoid this problem, what we did here, we did the MED simulations for the charged and discharged battery. From the MED simulations, we extracted representative solvation shells, and we submitted the solvation shells from the MED simulations to the FT calculations to improve the description of the atomic interactions within the solvation shell. Then, using 20 solvation shell for each one of the systems, we calculate the theoretical Raman. So, and if we look here, we have here in cyan the DFT average for the Raman spectroscopy for the charged battery, and we have here in black the experimental data. And if we compare, we have a really good match between the experimental and the Fourier simulations. And here, if we look, we have the Raman for different configurations for the solvation shell. And looking to our data, we could understand that when we have the charged battery, the lithium ion is interacting basically with the DMSO molecule, that is the solvent, and a little bit with the anion, because we have way more DMSO molecules than the anion. However, when we go to the discharge here, we have solvation shells that are more complex. And this also reflects in the agreement of the simulations and the experiments. So again, cyan, the DFT, black, the experiments. So you can see that now we still having some agreement, and the agreement is way better if we look to the unconvolute peaks here in the Raman. However, it's not too good as here in the charged battery. And this happens now because the solvation shell has more components. So if you look here, the lithium ion is interacting with other lithium ions in the system, also with the oxygen negative anions, and also with the perchlorate. So that means that when we discharge the batteries, the product of the discharging is now interacting with the lithium ion. And if we go to MED simulations, we can also see this behavior. So again, RDFs here. So as we saw, if we have here a high peak, so this black is the charged system, and here we are looking to the interaction of the lithium ion and DMSO molecule. So a high peak here means that we have a strong and close interaction between DMSO molecules and lithium ions. However, when we go to 30% of discharge and 50% of discharge, there is a decrease in this peak, so the DMSO is leaving this first solvation shell because the other ions are occupying the solvation shell. And also we can see here an increase in the second peak of the DMSO around the lithium. So that means that DMSO is in the second solvation shell. If we look here to the occurrence of contacts between lithium and the species in the electrolyte, we see that in the charged battery, we see a lot of interactions between DMSO and lithium. When we go to the discharged, these interactions of DMSO and lithium decrease, and we see an increase between the perchlorate and the lithium, and the oxygen and the lithium. And when we have more and more discharge, this behavior continues. So combining the Operando Raman, the DFT, and the MED simulations, we were able to propose a mechanism to understand the reversibility of our electrolytes. So what we saw here is when we have the charged battery, we have only lithium and DMSO, and they are interacting. When we have the discharged battery, we have the formation of this lithium, oxygen 2, and we have the interaction between all the ions in the systems, because again, ions tend to stay together. And when we recharge the battery, we see that we broke these interactions, and now we have again DMSO and the lithium. So this work here is a good example that how we can confirm and how we can improve our hypothesis from the experimental data when we do simulations, both DFT and also MED simulations. So as conclusion, I would like to highlight that this powerful approach that we can have when we combine theory simulations with experimental data. And also I put here a figure. It's not a good figure, but this is a figure from a book from MED simulations. It's called the Computer Simulations of Liquids. It's like one of the first books in MED simulations, and is one of the Bible of MED simulations that we have. And this is one chart that they have in this book since the beginning. And I really like this because here we can see what we were talking here. So we can have experiments, we can create models from our experiments, we can do our simulations, we can compare our experimental results with our computational results. And with this, we can first validate our models, see if our models are working or not. And also we can validate our hypotheses and theories about our experimental data. So in the end of the day, if we combine different methodologies, we can go beyond in the understanding of the materials and also the applications. So here I put a list of the members of the Ketenano and the P3 atomic battery team, and also here the P4 battery team. So thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the very insightful talk and the discussions and everything. Okay, now the talk is open for questions and discussion. Just feel free to raise your hand and then make your question, or you can write also in the chat, and then you can be checked. Okay, just raise your hands. Normally, okay, we start with Luana.
Hi, are you listening to me?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation, Tuana. I just would like to ask you to explain me a little bit more about that structure factor that you showed in slide 9. Because
Okay.
I have an image of structure factor that I think it's not the same.
Okay. No, so in structure factors, what we are doing, we are calculating the combination of basically all the RDFs that you can have if you look to the total structure factor. And you are looking to the behavior of a structure in the inverse, let's say in the reciprocal way. So that means that when we look to RDFs, we are looking to this structure here, right? I am seeing who is in the first solvation shell of each one. So with the RDFs, I can understand this fine solvation, like this very close behavior. When we look to the structure factor, we are doing the reciprocal of these RDFs here. So we are looking to what's happening in long distance. So in general, not in general, sorry. So when you see peaks here in short distance, you are not looking to the interaction here close to the ions. You are looking the big picture. So this behavior here indicates the formation of this kind of structure here. And each one of these peaks has its own meaning. Like, I not remember this by head, but some peaks here indicates that we have apolar domains and other we have polar domains. So looking to this, we can understand how the liquid organizes itself in the structure in long distance. So we are not looking for like any specific solvation shell. We are looking to a contribution of everything that is inside the liquid. We can also compare structure factors to neutron scattering, but here, if I remember correctly, I did not use the physical weights. So this is just using distance and coordinates. But thinking this way, structure factors we use to see the entire picture of the liquid, the entire picture of the material, and you can see this organization in long distance.
Okay, now it makes more sense. Thank you, Tuana.
Welcome.
Next question. Okay, I have a question, Tuana.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're talking initially motivated by the sodium-ion batteries, but then you discuss the result on the lithium-oxygen batteries. What is the main advantage or disadvantage of lithium-ion batteries compared to sodium-ion batteries?
The main advantage is because since in the lithium-oxygen batteries, the anode is a full block of lithium metal, this increases a lot the theoretical capacity of the battery. So any kind of anode metal battery, all of these batteries have very high performances, and they are basically the maximum energy density that we can have. However, since we have a full block of an alkaline metal here, we are talking about a metal that is very reactive. We have a lot of side reactions, and these side reactions decrease and create a lot of instability, decrease the lifespan of the battery and increase a lot the instability. So that means that in one side, we have a very good battery that can reach high performance. However, is a very unstable and low safety battery that is still having. So if we think this is a not too mature technology that we need to solve a lot of problems, but this is a very promising material compared to the intercalation batteries like lithium-ion batteries, sodium-ion, potassium ions. So basically, when we move to metal anode batteries, we are trying to reach the maximum performance that we can have. However, we are also increasing the instability and decreasing the safety of the battery. So these batteries are not in the markets yet, but sodium-ion batteries we already have in the market.
Okay. I have a question from George da Silva Nohara from the Advanced Energy Storage Program. So when you use DFT MED, they are calculated separately, or it is a hybrid model? The solvation shell simulated by DFT are taken from MED.
There are different things, like what we did here in this work we used classical MED simulations with force fields. So inside the classical MED simulations, we have empirical parameters that we use to fit some equations to describe the behavior of the atoms. So in the classical MED simulations, we use it here to find the solvation shell structures. Then we got this output from the MED simulations, the classical ones, use this as input in the DFT calculations, and now we performed DFT calculations. So we are using the MED simulations as a preparation for solvation shells for DFT. This is one approach, so separated techniques that we use together as input, output for one, becoming input for the other. But also, there's another techniques that we did not use here in these works, it's called ab initio molecular dynamics simulation. So it's still a molecular dynamics simulation. We still solving Newton's equations. We still having the movement of the atoms. However, the theory behind it is quantum theory. So in ab initio simulations, ab initio MED simulations, or DFT MED simulations, they are basically the same stuff. The same principle. We are using the quantum theory to solve and to feed the equations to solve the Newton's laws, Newton's equations, sorry. So in this case, we can describe mass transport, chemical reactions, charge transfer. Basically, we can describe everything. However, we are combining the high cost of the ab initio methods with the high cost of the MED simulations. So when we do ab initio MED simulations, we are facing very high costs. For example, in classical MED simulations, like this data here. Here I have some hundreds of nanoseconds and maybe some 30,000 atoms, something like that. In ab initio molecular dynamics simulations, I can only reach like some picoseconds, like in some dozen of picoseconds, and also some hundreds of atoms. So the point when you do simulation, the first thing that you need to think is, what is my problem and how I can solve this problem, which model I should use. So for a problem like this, ab initio simulations are impractical. To try to see like a good Raman structure, classical MED simulations solely is not good. But if we want to see like the decomposition of a molecule inside a surface, inside of a structure, maybe ab initio calculations using MED can be good. So this is the choice. You need to do the choice for the problem that you have and the model that you have.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question is by Ivan Rus. Ivan?
Yes, Professor, thank you. Thank you, Tanan, and congrats for the talk. I have a question relating the viscosity. I know, first of all, I don't know nothing about molecular dynamics, but it captured my attention the way it is modeled, the viscosity. So from my understanding, the equation is considering the displacements of the ionics and also the charges of the ionics. But is it possible to consider also the mass of the particles that are moving, or it is only the only interest is to correlate the charges with the viscosity only? I mean, I don't know if I explain myself clearly.
No, yes. If you think about Stokes-Einstein equation, in Stokes-Einstein equation, we correlated viscosity and mass transport. So in general, what we expect for like, let's say simple liquids like water or any pure solvent, you expect that when you see this increase here, you are going to see the decrease here. So the viscosity is directly related to the mass transport in the system. Although the way that we measure viscosity in MED simulations, we are not measuring the mass transport. We are working with the the pressure tensor of the box, like similar what you do in DFT calculations, but you are totally correct. Viscosity is related to the mass transport. Thinking in this way, if you have a more viscous, you have less mass transport, and probably you also have less charge transport, because charge transport also depends of mass transport. So in a very simple way, we can say that everything is correlated with the mass transport inside the system.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Tonan. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivan. The next question will be done by Rafael Freire.
Hi, Tona, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the nice talk. I was wondering here, when you have a electrochemical cell, you have a kind of double layer, but what I can see in your representations that your ions seems to be attached to the surface of the electrodes.
Mhm.
So am I missing something, or you don't have a kind of double layer or something like this in batteries, for batteries?
So first, I did not provide too much information here, so this is my fault. So I'm showing here only the cations, right? So all the empty space here, we have anions and solvent molecules. So when we think about this double layer, you are totally correct. We have the double layer. But if you think here in the left, you have positive charges, and in the right, you have negative charges. So if we look here in the bottom of the figure, can you see this like an empty space? This empty space here is filled with neutral and also negative molecules. So if we think in the double layer, as you said, we have like positive, we have the negative charge, then we have this positive nanodomain that is positive charge, and then we have a little bit bulk behavior, and also we go back here to the negative charge, to the positive charge and the negative charge. Here, it's hard to see this double layer in the surface here because of the size of the molecule. So this part here is where the charge is. So this part here is interacting with the electrode, and this part is not interacting. So somehow we can say that this double layer that we expected will be here within these chains. So if you look here, can you see that we have the chains pointing to the other side? So we still having these double layers, but the problem with this system here is that because we have a lot of different molecules, different species, so the double layer is not well defined. When we look to, if it was just an ion liquid, you are going to see like positive, negative, bulk, positive, negative, like almost a mirror effect.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Turan. Thanks, Rafael. The next question is by John Adivaya. Hi, Turan. It's a very nice talk. Can you comment on the liquid and solid electrolytes in sodium-ion batteries with respect to ionic conductivity, stability, and safety?
Okay, so solid electrolytes, we have different classes of solid electrolytes, like we have polymer solid electrolytes, but also we have inorganic solid electrolytes. In general, when we go from liquid to solid electrolytes, we see an increase in the safety of the battery because if you have a solid electrolyte, there is no leak effect, so you decrease a lot the problems regarding safety that you can have. Also, in general, solid electrolytes have lower toxicity and lower flammability, and of course, the vapor pressure is not a problem anymore. However, the problem inside the solid electrolytes are first the ionic conductivity. When you go to ceramics, you can see high values, so they are good for this. When you go to polymers, the ionic conductivity is not too high as in the liquid phase. So this is why we play with the polymer structure to try to improve this ionic conductivity. When we look to the interface here, when we have the solid electrolyte, we have a problem in the contact here, because thinking this way, you have two solids that need to interact. So you are going to see some empty space inside this interface, and this contact can be a problem when we have like ceramic electrolytes. When you look to solid polymers, this contact is not a problem anymore because they have some kind of liquid behavior there, so the wettability is better. However, the stability will be lower than the ceramics. So going from liquid to solid, we can increase the safety. Maybe we can increase ionic conductivity, but also we can have problems with the contact between the electrode and the electrolyte. So you need to evaluate each technology, each material, and how you can deal with these problems.
Okay, thanks for that. So next advise the question. Now we have the last question is to be done by Mohammad Arfa.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you to Anana for a nice talk and very informative for me especially. Actually, if you go to the slide number 12, I want to a little bit know about the salvation shell. I was thinking about the entropy. If like our electrolyte system, what will be the role of entropy play in stabilizing or destabilizing the salvation shell like that? If we increase the here I'm entropy, I'm considering the entropy in terms of temperature like that.
You mean how the entropy behaviors could impact the...
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I have an extra slide here. Just a second. Okay. So in general, when you have like a cation and an ion interacting, it's always good to have an asymmetric ion, like this anion here. So since this is asymmetrical, the solvation shell that we are going to see in the electrolyte will be also asymmetrical. So that means that somehow we can say that if we use asymmetry in the ions, we have a higher entropic behavior in the system. When we have this low degree of symmetry, you have different solvation shells that are going to behave differently. And because of this, in general, what we see a higher exchange rate within the solvation shell. So it's not a direct behavior. I think at least until I know, I cannot say that. I can say that increasing the entropy, I will have better ionic conductivity. But what we can say is that if we have lower symmetries in the solvation shells, like more, how can you say, a large variety of solvation shells within the electrolyte that maybe can reflect in a higher entropy, this increases the ionic conductivity. So instead of thinking of entropy, I think it's easier thinking about the symmetry of the solvation shell.
Yeah, thank you. But if one last point, if I see to the aggregation, and aggregations when they aggregates and they jumps from anode to cathode like that. So if I see a lot of ions or molecules can jump from anion to anode to cathode like that in electrolytes. So normally, if I think aggregation is not good for conductivity, but when you were talking about, you says in aggregation they jump in form of a group like that. So here what it shows the behavior like aggregation is good.
Depending what you are looking and how you are dealing with this. If you have like a large aggregation, you have
actually definitely I'm interested in conductivity.
No, okay. So if you have a large aggregation, so you are going to see high viscosity, because when you have more and more ions, you have lower and lower ionic mobility. So if you have an aggregation, in general, what you are going to see is a decrease in the ionic conductivity. However, also if you have the aggregation and you have this easier movement of the ions within the aggregation, what you are going to see is a bigger contribution of the ion to the ionic conductivity. So you need to think that when you are looking to the battery, although we use ionic conductivity as a descriptor of the electrolyte capacity or the electrolyte performance, you are not only looking to the ionic conductivity. What we are looking is the movement of the active metal ion. So in a sodium ion battery, if I have an electrolyte, like let's think in this way, you have a very good ionic liquid with a very high ionic conductivity. So you add just a small amount of sodium. For the battery, this is not good because you don't have too much sodium to go one side to the other side. However, if you have an ionic liquid with lower viscosity than this previous one, but in which you can have more and more sodium ions, and these sodium ions can have a better movement than in the other systems, then you have a good system. So when you think about charge transport in the electrolyte, you need to think the overall charge transport and also the charge transport that comes from the alkali metal ion. It's okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. Now, I think the time is already over. I just want to thank you, Tuanan, for the very insightful talk and all the discussions. And then we see everyone together again in 2 weeks. And then thanks a lot, Tuanan.
Thank you,
And
Professor.
congratulations for everyone. Okay, for the president, the comment, and so on. Okay, thanks. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.